There are few franchises that I can say were as affected by the internet's growth as Sonic the Hedgehog, a series that in the days of schoolyard debates and gaming magazines truly exploded onto the scene and became the de facto counter-program to Chris Pratt's plumbing platformers, is often nowadays boiled down to two base ingredients thanks to the overwhelming online discourse, forum discussions, debates, and of course retrospective videos. Those two ingredients? The expectation of a mediocre, buggy, or subpar game, and the expectation of speed. There's a whole generation out there that's grown up expecting Sonic to be kind of a train wreck, and part of that is admittedly due to what we'll just call the dark era of genuinely rough Sonic games, the games that helped lead to Sonic's reputation today, and even left a number of players pondering if the series was ever truly good. But this reputation doesn't just affect the more recent games. I can say firsthand that I've been roped into that belief when it comes to a game like Sonic Adventure, a game that more people have watched online than have ever played, a game that I didn't play until well after it was hammered into me that it was bad, that it was a rough transition to 3D, and a game that I didn't enjoy when I played it, partly because I expected a speedy roller coaster ride of a game when I heard the name Sonic, and because I was looking out for bugs and janky mechanics. Let me make this clear, I wouldn't call myself a Sonic fan. I've given due diligence to most of the mainline games, and often they're just not for me. I've never cared for Sonic Adventure. But it was thanks to Sonic's 30th Anniversary Symphony that I really took in the love and the reverence that millions have for Mr. Needlemouse here, and I started to wonder, did my expectations taint my experience? If I had played Sonic Adventure in 1999 like I did Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time during their respective launches, would I have seen this game the same way as all of its fans? Would I put it up there as one of the best games ever made like so many publications genuinely did? Until hindsight had those very same publications taking it out behind the barn due to age and shifting public opinion. I couldn't stand the idea that I hadn't given Sonic Adventure a fair shake. So I flipped the calendar back 2 decades to the turn of the millennium. I put myself into my finest Zubaz pants and I played Sonic Adventure as if for the very first time. Taking my time to explore every detail rather than trying to rush by it all, taking in its atmosphere, appreciating what was in 1999 an incredibly ambitious moonshot of a game, a new style of system seller that would try to have something for everybody in the household. I put aside my biases as much as any person can, and, well, the title says it all. I opened my heart to Sonic Adventure. I ended up learning to love it the same way that fans did growing up, and this dumb game f***ing rules. To peel back the curtain a bit, when I was first mulling over the idea of replaying Sonic Adventure for a video, my immediate concern was presenting the game in a light that hasn't yet been done to death, and in a fun, hopefully informative style that could maybe even teach things to longtime fans the way that I've done in the past, from The Legend of Dragoon to Parasite Eve to Metroid to Ratchet & Clank. But with Sonic, that's a whole different beast from those games that often didn't have their behind-the-scenes stories painted in full color in one spot before, because not only is Sonic a series that I'm by no means an expert in, there are, without exaggeration, thousands of those such experts that can inform more off the top of their head than I ever could with hours of research. Thankfully, I know somebody who I would consider one of the foremost Sonic experts around, whom I could come to with questions and better inform my perspective as I wiped the slate clean and played this game as if for the very first time. Even more thankfully, he happens also to be my editor, my good friend Chris, also known as Mykonos Fan here on YouTube. Please make sure to check out his channel. I've left it up to him to add any extra snippets of knowledge that I wouldn't know, any supplemental info, and I'm sure even a couple of corrections, like so. For example, without Chris's insight, I never would have thought of the full context behind Sonic Adventure's intro, more specifically, its nowadays maligned production values. I know when I first played this game in full for myself back in early 2015, yes, I actually did check, I was already in the mindset of maybe side-eyeing Adventure a bit for its cheesy, of-its-era voice acting, but I was more critical of the random, sudden music cuts instead of the smoother transitions you would expect, or crossfades, or what have have you, and the stiff panning of the camera during these cutscenes. For whatever reason at the time, I hadn't considered that more or less nobody had a proper camera system rigged up for cinematics yet, that these were as stiff as they were because behind the scenes, the camera's being pulled along a track in real time in-engine as smoothly as possible using Sonic Team's early and understandably slapdash camera system. Even Sonic collecting rings right before this first tutorial boss fight is a straight-up signal that these are in-engine, but hey, I guess I wasn't paying as much attention to the little things before it was my job to do so. I can admit with hindsight that I was preoccupied with noticing the things that people didn't like, not out of a desire to dislike the game myself, but just out of the loud consensus that this game wasn't that great. And I was too busy doing that to consider that these shots actually do look pretty great, especially in a game that I also hadn't considered came out in Japan only a month after The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It was thanks to going in with a cleansed palette over the last month or so that I got to marvel at how impressive Sonic Adventure's lighting engine really was for the time, with streetlights and police headlights beaming onto the ground below, highlighting the little drops of rain that pattered the asphalt. And again, thanks to my chats with Mr. Mykonos fan, I only appreciated these things because I played the proper version of Sonic Adventure. For those that may not know, despite Sonic Adventure being the Dreamcast's highest-selling game by far, the version of Adventure that the majority of players have experienced was the DX Director's Cut version originally released on the GameCube after the Dreamcast, well... Whenever I spoke to people that had played both versions of Sonic Adventure, I had always heard that this DX version was a hit-or-miss upgrade from the original, but it wasn't until I was shown the two side by side that I knew, okay, yeah, I had to play that Dreamcast version. There are countless videos online that highlight these differences in granular detail, but the short of it is that although DX runs at 60 frames per second compared to the Dreamcast's 30 FPS, it's a much less stable build, with that higher frame rate being more inconsistent. There are more frequent gameplay and visual bugs. The lighting engine was completely changed in that it was kind of just removed. Most of the textures were often changed for the worse. Sonic's very shiny now. The entire atmosphere of the game, and thus its original production value, is changed with a director's cut that wasn't directed by the original game's director. Let me say that again. The director's cut was not directed by the director. Now, to be fair, some folks prefer that DX version. Usually, it seems to line up with the version you played as a kid. The GameCube release was the version that I first played here and there at friends' houses, and DX was the version that I first finished back in 2015. As you can imagine, I ran into a laundry list of issues that definitely took away from my experience, but I did play the PlayStation 3 port, which itself is a port of the DX version, 2004 PC port, which itself is also an even worse port of DX than DX already was. By the time you get to the most recent Steam version of Sonic Adventure, you're looking at a PC port of a PS3/Xbox 360 port of a PC port of a GameCube port of a Dreamcast game. You can kind of see why some of these issues actually mount and get worse with each subsequent release. In the spirit of attaining that original production value and jumping as closely back into 1999 as I could, I turned to fans who naturally did it better than Sega has ever cared to, and I played the Steam version with what's called the Dreamcast Conversion mod. This massive mod pack dials just about everything back to that original, although it does include a few tweaks and improvements such as the higher frame rate. The folks responsible even went above and beyond and included the seasonal events such as Christmas trees in the overworld or Dreamcast launch celebration banners for each region that players would have experienced if their system was connected to the internet back then. My mom has been depressed since yesterday. What the fuck? Merry Christmas, kiddo! I gambled away all your savings! Oh, that's so sad. I'm not even a Sega dude and this one hurts. Is that why the kid was depressed? Now, for full authenticity, I could have recorded all of this footage on my actual Dreamcast, which I bought with Sonic Adventure in 2015 when I decided I wanted to give the game a shot for myself, but when I played it back then, the disc started screaming at me and looping corrupted, bit-crunched ring noises every time I picked up a ring. No thank you. I bought the DX version on PS3 that day, and my Dreamcast has been in a box ever since. I'm good. So yes, I'm giving the game the absolute best chance in the limelight, even better than any version of the game has ever actually had, but hey, our rosy nostalgia glasses usually do that for us anyway, and then some. What's a little frame rate bump in comparison? Sonic Adventure makes its ambitions clear immediately. Right on the main menu, you're teased with 6 distinct campaigns, each with their own playable character, but only Sonic's available from the start. Nobody really asked for something as involved from Sonic as intertwining asynchronous storytelling, but I can't help but appreciate that they wanted to experiment in this way. Of course, we've got our main trio of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, and Adventure also introduces to a wider audience Sonic's obsessive mega fan slash wannabe girlfriend, Amy Rose, as well as 2 brand new characters to round out the experience. One of Dr. Eggman's new robot henchmen, E-102 Gamma, and He Who Shall Not Be Named. As you progress in Sonic's story, you'll unlock the rest of the cast one by one not long after you run into them in-game. Where the original trio tends to lean more into the series' trademark speedier movement and slight exploration focus, our newcomers pull off vastly different gameplay approaches to round things out and really aim to live up to the adventure in the title. Our 6 campaigns respectively feature some speedy platforming goodness that challenges you to explore the stages and discover hidden paths and secrets within, a Sonic game, a race through some of those very same stages, a more open-world styled treasure hunt, a sort of third-person shooter, dare I say, a Sonic rendition of Resident Evil, and fishing. For your dad or something. Let's focus first on the classic Sonic gameplay for now. For Sonic, this adventure is a straight-up translation of the Genesis games into the third dimension, asking players to speed through and explore a handful of levels, all with the end goal of freeing a bunch of animals that Eggman's captured and plans to use for his robotic army. If you want a pure Sonic game, his story and adventure covers every base, while the rest of the cast pop in and out while on their own journeys, making you wonder what else is going on under the hood here. And of course, there's the intrigue of this new, ever-present threat that is this game's monster of the week, Chaos. As I said before, this opening has really grown on me now that I've stepped back to really dig into it. You've got Sonic doing dumb Sonic stuff, you're immediately shown that you've got to be ready for Chaos to pop back up at any time during this story since, he's a water monster and could probably be anywhere where water is, and you've got that simple threat of Eggman standing back in the shadows, ready to this time definitely destroy that pesky hedgehog once and for all, even if it means he has to summon a god to do it. I mean, not that Chaos is really that strong of a god, at least not yet. All you've got to do is hit him a couple times and poof, down the drain he goes, and really, almost all of Sonic Adventure's boss fights end up being this quick. It's a little disappointing overall, but it's probably for the best, because your camera is locked onto the bosses at all times, and that lock-on is... It's not great. There's even a Sonic fan in the game itself who warns you that the camera's not good. You know what? I can't even be mad about that. I respect the honesty. Still, it's a deceptively strong opening to set up that classic Sonic chases Eggman story we've seen time and again, followed naturally by one of the most iconic levels in the series, Emerald Coast. Sonic's taking a poolside nap and getting some sunburn when he's awoken by the sound of Tails crashing a plane on the other side of the city's beach resort. Eager to save his buddy, Sonic jumps into action, racing down the coastline in a simple, relatively linear sampler to get you comfortable with the game's mechanics. Emerald Coast ends up serving its purpose so well that I don't actually have all that much to say about it. The enemies are simple and won't really bother you if you keep moving. The springs, boost pads, and now gigantic loop-de-loops give you that thrilling sense of momentum that back in '99 not many games could compete with. It's got frequent safety nets and lower, slower paths for you if you make a mistake, while leaving the more exciting expert paths right in your sight above you, challenging you to get good just like in the 2D games. And of course, that's all before even considering the fact that orcas hate Sonic so much that they try to kill him on sight. Do we ever find out why? I don't really care, I want to know. Emerald Coast, simply put, is a level that's just cool, a memorable, perfect transitional piece to bring players into Sonic's third dimension. But what I like most about it is really the simplest thing, the thing that I, and I'm sure countless other players that came to Sonic Adventure later in life, just skipped right over, and that's this little challenge at the end of the level when you finish and see that you've only completed the C rank of this stage. Obviously, that means that there's a B rank and an A rank, but when I first played, I never thought much of this. I was too preoccupied with all the game ahead of me to look back at replaying parts of it, not to mention that as adults we've all got huge backlogs now. And to that end, I didn't really like how Sonic controlled. He felt a bit too buttery. The camera always left me feeling uneasy, even on a guided level like this one. Why would I take the time to play more of something that I wasn't exactly vibing with already? Especially since your only reward for doing these extra ranked challenges is another emblem, a collectible that doesn't actually accomplish anything? This wasn't Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, a collectathon where that arbitrary number going up unlocks new levels and areas. It's just a number, and what's the point of that? But that was before. Now I'm playing Sonic Adventure like it's 1999. I don't have a backlog, and I'm gonna savor as much of this game as I can since I wouldn't have a ton of games for this brand new system. I want that meaningless number as high as it goes. I think that's part of what so many folks like myself miss today. We overlook the adventure part of the game's title, and that adventure really does mean something here. Although few, if any, levels in this game have nearly as many winding paths as the more arcadey-focused Genesis classics, the 3 variations of each level in Sonic Adventure challenge you in different ways. They force you to rethink how you're playing a little bit. For all 6 characters, finishing the stage as required for the story is the basic C rank, and you'll get 1 emblem for that. The B rank tends to encourage you to explore, in Sonic's case asking you to finish the level with at least 50 rings. Now, getting 50 rings is easy, but you've also got to focus on keeping them, on not getting hit by enemies or hazards or running off the stage. You'll want to tread slowly, peek around for maybe a shield power-up somewhere, or if you get hit, you'll need to hunt your surroundings for more rings and ring boxes to build your stockpile back up. Most characters tend to have this 50 ring requirement. It's simple, maybe not even worth explaining, until you get to the A rank, which is for 5 of the 6 characters a time trial, and often a steep one. In fact, Emerald Coast here asks you to beat the level in under 2 minutes, one of Sonic's toughest A ranks despite this being the very first stage. It's a challenge that a first-time player would probably have to come back to later. What I tended to do as Sonic was, unless the story specifically gated off a level after I finished it the first time, I went back in immediately and got all 3 ranks. When it came to the C ranks, I always took my time with every character, and I really admired the level design, the atmosphere. I took it all in as if I was a younger kid. This, along with exploring further and being extra careful for the B ranks, made me more comfortable with Sonic Adventure's handling than I ever had been before. I know, shocker, playing the game makes you better at it, but more than that, I learned many of the little tricks that I would have skipped past or tried and failed years ago. Because I took my time, I started noticing places to cut corners, I experimented with my momentum and Sonic's potentially game-breaking spin dash into jump combo. Hell, I even found myself getting more comfortable with this game's sometimes iffy homing attack, a new inclusion to Sonic's abilities meant to make the transition to 3D a bit easier for players and maintain Sonic's momentum and flow state while defeating enemies, an inclusion that, ironically, slowed me down a bit more the first time I played Adventure DX because I didn't trust it not to bug out and get me hurt or killed. And it was all of this slow-going prep, that adventuring, that had me not only attempting the A ranks, but blasting through them, conquering them, and getting so comfortable that I began blasting through later stages as if they were second nature. Now, I know to some folks this is going to sound like such an obvious second nature kind of thing. I can already hear some of you asking, how could you not think to adventure in Sonic Adventure? Well, for one, the titles in Sonic games don't tend to stick out to me as super meaningful. A game like Sonic Unleashed tends to have some pretty linear, leashed level designs, just to name the first example that comes to mind. This very game's director's cut betrays the meaning of a director's cut, again, by being directed by a different guy. I can't get over that. And many game titles don't really mean much when you actually think about them deeply. They're usually just kinda catchy buzzwords. But still, it was something that just never consciously occurred to me, and I'm sure to many, many others. When folks hear Sonic, whether you like it or not, the word association goes right to speed. The other words attached don't matter right away, especially when you consider that we've grown up with this game's title just being a thing. It just becomes words at a certain point. And so, when the game's got those barriers such as controls that at first make you hesitate, or a camera that fights you pretty often, even on the DX upgrade, which adds a free camera control option rather than putting you at the mercy of the very messy Dreamcast auto camera. When these things get in the way of fully enjoying the journey, you're more inclined to just want to keep rushing towards the destination, especially when Sonic's entire 21st century narrative has been, gotta go fast. You'd think that all this optional bonus content is just for the folks that love the game, rather than itself being a way to get you to start loving the game by doing what that Mr. Know-It-All kid said earlier and just pushing through the jank, just moving forward when the camera doesn't work, just moving forward when you may not like parts of the game. It's not great game design in any traditional sense, I think we can all agree on that, but I have to admit it does work, and it's almost like Santa's magic in a way. It'll mostly affect kids, the ones that have all the time in the world to consume every part of the games they're playing. My boring adult ass thought he was too good for it when I first played, and I can admit now, having seen Santa's magic in action, I was wrong. It does really work. The game encourages you even further to explore and master these stages through something that's even more of Santa's magic, and also happens to be the most 90s mashup you can possibly imagine: the Sonic Tamagotchi that was the Chao Garden. On top of all of Sonic Adventure's campaigns is a whole micro-game centered around raising and training these little creatures known as Chao. Everybody knows about the Dreamcast VMU integration, allowing these to be even closer to an actual Tamagotchi as you raised them via your awesome playable memory card. But the other side that I feel tends to get more glossed over outside of that core Sonic fanbase is that the Chao Garden encourages you to replay the game's main stages over and over again as part of raising the Chao. The animals that you rescue by defeating enemies and the rings that you earn just by playing can be used to increase a number of your Chao Child stats, with different animals affecting stats in their own way. And since some animals only appear inside particular stages or enemies, a dedicated player would likely have to play through every stage, and doing so would mean that slowly but surely, you'd complete the B and A ranks naturally just by training your little buddy. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I fully understand the intricacies of the Chao Garden, nor do I really care to. As I understand it, the DX version is a bit modified from the original game's much more basic proof of concept, and this DX version's Chao Garden worked in elements that were improved later in Sonic Adventure 2. I wouldn't know. This part definitely isn't for me in the way that it would have been when I had far more free time on my hands, and trust me, the Chao Garden needs a lot of free time if you want to go for every reward. I'm talking replaying stages dozens and dozens of times, and running back and forth between those stages and the Chao Garden hubs after each and every level run, because the animals that you save in levels don't actually bank like your rings do, so you've gotta feed them to your Chao or whatever every single time. It's clearly an incredibly involved side game, one that synergizes well with Sonic Adventure's goal of pushing you to do and see everything that this game has to offer, but it's definitely far too slow on the uptake for me. Little Patreon never had a chance. But for as little as $1 a month, the price of a cup of coffee, you can help this small boy find the sustenance he needs. In Sonic's case, what's even more incredible is that the A rank isn't the only mastery challenge for his stages. It's not the only time that the game challenges your skills on these levels. At the end of Emerald Coast, Sonic finds that Tails has sadly survived the plane crash. The plane, however, didn't. It turns out that Tails was using a new power source, a Chaos Emerald he found somewhere, I don't know, in a dump or something.
Yay!
And the dinky biplane couldn't handle the radical energy, or whatever. So Sonic and Tails head over to Tails' workshop to try the Emerald out on Sonic's plane, the Tornado, making its return from the Genesis games. In fact, Tails even joins Sonic when you go to the latter's second stage, Windy Valley, following you through the level just like he would have done in Sonic's 2 and 3. At this point, you'll have unlocked the ability to play Tails' story from the main menu whenever you'd like, and Sonic's second level happens to be Tails' first. Tails' adventure, is often one and the same with Sonic's level design, maybe changed a tiny bit here or there, but crucially, Tails' campaign features a racing-themed twist. In every Tails level, you'll be challenged to race Sonic, or in some cases Eggman, to the end of the stage, and if you're not fast enough, it's game over. This serves not just as a fun sort of callback to Tails joining Sonic on screen in 2 and 3 as a little brother mode, but also as a kind of B-side to many of Sonic's levels, daring you to prove that you've learned these stages well enough to break even your A-rank Sonic record. I'll also say that these levels aren't great game design either in any traditional sense. That's gonna be a running theme, but yet again, it works. In a head-to-head race, Tails would lose every time to the blue blur, and Tails knows that, so Sonic stages are tweaked, or sometimes just turned entirely on their head to account for Tails' ability to fly for a short period of time. Sonic can definitely jump pretty far when you know what you're doing in this game, but he can't just cheat and outright skip entire chunks of the game like Tails can. When you're playing as the two-tailed fox, the developers at Sonic Team are encouraging you to just break the game, to learn the level layout so well during your first campaign that you can speed even faster than the Dreamcast can draw the ground below you. It shouldn't work at all, but it does, and by playing more of Sonic, you're also giving yourself an even stronger leg up whenever you choose to start playing Tails' story. And it also serves another purpose, forcing Tails out of his buddy's shadow narratively, challenging him as a character to stand out on his own and believe in himself. The young little fox dude looks up to Sonic, and all he wants to do is be as cool and strong and awesome and radical as his pal, but every time he feels that he comes up short. All those times that you made your little brother or sister play as Tails in Sonic 2 and 3, knowing that they couldn't really do anything to help, but that it would at least shut them up for a little while? Tails felt that, man. That hurt his feelings. So while from Sonic's perspective, he sees Tails following him around as that little brother here on stage 2, just kind of getting in Sonic's way as he tries to collect the Chaos Emeralds before Eggman does, from Tails' point of view, all he's trying to do is show his friend that he can keep up and contribute, to show himself that he's not worthless. I'm not going to pretend that Tails' story is well acted or directed, considering that they gave the English role to an actual child, but again, that's almost kind of the point when you really think about it. Here's this genius little dude suffering from imposter syndrome, just trying to prove to his friend, and more so to himself, that he's valuable. That's the exact kind of message that's perfect for a kid's game. This perspective-driven storytelling is the focus of Sonic Adventure's story, showing players that there's not just one side to a coin, that different people can see the same event pretty differently, and frankly, this doesn't always work out either, I'll admit. For example, when Sonic and Tails encounter Dr. Robotnik outside of Tails' workshop, each of our heroes in his own mind thinks that he's the one that coined the "haha, he's fat like an egg" joke. Pretty much any time that two or more of our heroes interact, you'll end up seeing a slightly different cutscene with tweaked dialogue depending on who you're playing as, just to fill in any gaps and ensure that every story can sort of stand on its own without context from the others. After all, they don't know which order you're going to play it. In practice, there are a lot of edges that poke out where the polish just wasn't there, despite the English translation itself being reasonably accurate. Even the game's pre-rendered FMV scenes try to pretend that they're specific to the campaign that you're in, usually just having an unmoving character model zoom across the screen while green-screened explosions take down the egg carrier. Oscar-worthy. Cool idea, messy execution. For example, no matter which campaign you're playing, Tails looks like a total dork when he lets Eggman just steal his Chaos Emerald. Even if you win. Even if you fight Eggman and win, right afterwards he's just, nope, it's still mine anyway. Sometimes characters will run into one another for no ostensible reason other than to try and remind you where you are in this unspoken overall Sonic Adventure timeline, almost begging you to swap around between the campaigns instead of just playing them one by one. It often feels forced, and sometimes it results in the single most threatening image I've ever seen in a video game. With all the overlap, it quickly leads to an issue where you don't know which version of events to take at face value, so it all ends up feeling like you should just stop paying attention after you're done with Sonic. At least specifically when it comes to the crossover scenes. And really, that's probably for the best, since Sonic's not just that baseline, that way of getting you interested in the other characters and what they might be doing, all while Sonic's constantly chasing after Eggman. He's also, naturally and thankfully, the longest of the 6 stories by far. Everybody else will take you about an hour tops from start to finish, and at least in my playthrough, discounting all the A and B rank stages, Sonic took about double that. If you're just playing through the core journey for each character, it eventually leaves you wondering why the developers even bothered to go so broad instead of going deep on just a few gameplay styles, a debate that's all but consumed Sonic ever since. But the thing is, I would argue that at least 3 or 4 of those 6 stories do achieve that level of depth anyway, both because of the A and B rank challenges, as I've already mentioned, and because of the heavy legwork done by the open world adventure field. See, in between most stages, you'll be given the ability to freely roam through a few hub areas, a few blocks in the city of Station Square, the Mystic Ruins and its nearby jungle, and Dr. Eggman's transforming egg carrier ship. Generally, there's not a ton to do except figure out exactly where the game wants you to go next, and sometimes that's easier said than done, as the cutscenes tend to drop off suddenly without really telling you what you're actually supposed to do. I don't love that about this game. I certainly liked it even less when I first played, but even now, I would have appreciated a bit stronger game direction in between the missions, even if it was just, I don't know, our main characters saying to themselves, I wonder if somebody in the ruins has any advice, or whatever it would be. The best we've got here is a floating red hint orb that will usually point you in the right direction, but that only appears in a few specific spots. Instead, what Sonic Adventure tries to do breaks all of my video game muscle memory, specifically my role-playing game muscle memory. Because after just about every level, a ton of the NPCs walking through each of these hub areas will have brand new written dialogue. During my first playthrough, I just hadn't thought to talk to the same 10 or so people more than once or twice, but they end up not only providing strong hints more often than not as to what you're supposed to do, they also have their own little micro-stories that play out across this game's asynchronous timeline. So while players who just mainline the story will often end up feeling that the hubs are a bit lackluster, and they'll certainly notice valid complaints with the lack of direction, there's an impressive amount of effort that goes towards giving you your bearings and trusting you to put the overall timeline together yourself. For example, you can figure out where you are in the story and which character's story starts the earliest by seeing how far away this girl is from the burger shop. Over the course of this few days, or however long Sonic Adventure is meant to be, she inches closer and closer to the shop, lamenting that she doesn't have the courage to ask out the burger shop cashier, whom she has a crush on. You'll learn quickly if you're paying attention that the casino plaza is off limits early on in the game, but that it opens up in the evenings, and after days of little hints that there's tension bubbling at the train station, its workers go on strike midway into the overall story as a major plot point that's not actually a major plot point for the main game itself. Because of this, throughout all 6 campaigns, I found myself going out of my way to chat with every NPC, partly just to see if eventually the team got tired of keeping it all organized, and partly because I loved seeing how these micro-stories played out. Not only is something like the train strike a great way of telling you that your next stage is somewhere in the city for now since you can't leave, it lets the game experiment with the passage of time in a way that nobody would really expect out of a dumb little platformer. So while I might knock the game for sometimes leaving you wondering where to go, the game is trying to get you to wander aimlessly just for a bit at first so that you learn to observe these folks. And by leaving you a bit directionless at times, it sets up these little moments of humanity that pay off later if you continue to pay attention. I can appreciate that even if, again, maybe not the most well-designed thing to look at decades later. And what these short conversations also do is direct you towards some of each character's upgrades, which you tend to find hidden somewhere in the overworld. Some of these are mandatory for progression, such as Sonic's Lightspeed Dash, which lets you charge up a spin dash and then fly through a line of rings all at once. Others are optional, teased in hidden areas in one character's story only to be paid off later when you're playing as the character that can access that area. Not all of these are really that useful, and a few of them aren't even exactly hinted at to begin with, but I'm a sucker for these little, almost Metroid-esque upgrades that appear on your character's model that show progression, and I'm just as much of a sucker for moments when a game rewards you for paying extra attention and being curious, even if that is just a few lines of dialogue. And that's why I grew to love Sonic's gameplay here in Adventure, because as I explored the overworld, as I played around with the Lightspeed Dash once I unlocked it, and just the Spin Dash Jump in general, I started noticing ways that I could experiment and find my own paths through all of these levels. And make no mistake, I can't stress enough that this game clearly wants you to learn how to break it. There are quite a few of the A-rank time trials that essentially require you to exploit Sonic's physics if you want to have so much as a chance, and although breaking a game is never necessarily a great thing, I took so much joy in solving these fast-paced puzzles in my own way. The first few stages ended up being simple enough, mostly having one main path with a big set piece of some sort, Emerald Coast's Orca Chase, running up a tornado in Windy Valley, which, by the way, stupid, I love it, racing down a snowy mountain, an actual roller coaster ride, or gambling, the best set piece of all. It's just enough of a sampler to really get you feeling comfortable, a mix of greatest hit motifs from the earlier Sonic games with that extra punch tossed in. It's the second half of Sonic's story, however, the parts that I never fully appreciated until now, where, man, this game just comes alive. I can't say much that hasn't already been said about the amazing atmosphere of Speed Highway, as Sonic's running from Eggman's police cruisers, literally running down the side of a building, dodging helicopter blades, blasting through roadways so confusing you'd think MC Escher designed them. It's a thrill in its own right. But I can say that I never fully appreciated just how many different routes you can take here once you start experimenting with a good spin dash jump. I hadn't learned to love the second half of this level when the stage opens up into a few normal-ish streets and connects back to the Station Square hub world by way of the City Hall building, a little nod that I just had completely missed in-game up until now. Even still, I'm always riding such a high from the first half of Speed Highway that I still today find myself speeding through its tail end instead of standing on the rooftops and just taking in how much of a jungle gym that second half is. I still, right now, can't fully appreciate that second half of the level. That's how good the first half is. Speaking of jungle gyms, the next stage, Red Mountain, is one that I forgot even existed, and yet it might actually be my favorite now because of how well it teaches you its secrets and exploits. It's not even like Red Mountain is a particularly noteworthy level. In fact, it starts off with some surprisingly peppy, very unfitting music for a half-mountain, half-volcano stage full of fire hazards. But that music fits remarkably well when you consider that the level is actually trying to be a playground under the hood, a playground that's admittedly on fire. It's something as simple as these monkey bars, the kind of thing that as seasoned hashtag gamers we would never think twice about skipping, but for a new player coming in fresh, these will be a basic test to challenge your comfort with Sonic's control exactly halfway into the game. A challenge asking if you've mastered his homing attack and air dash, and even your trust in the camera itself. The first time you run into one of the monkey bars on Red Mountain, it'll be a gap that's just wide enough that you'd rather go slow and take your time climbing across the bars, the antithesis of hyperfast Sonic gameplay and the hyperfast rest of this level, where you're riding down zip lines and going nuts at breakneck speeds. But before you can run, you gotta climb. Just very, very slow climbing. It's set up in a totally safe area. You're not gonna get punished or hit if you mess up. It's just traverse these monkey bars. This little mini mountain that starts the level happens to loop around as you climb it, teasing you with a ring box floating right in the corner of your eyesight. Totally safe to get once again, but to get it you'll have to drop back down to that monkey bar area. If you're a newer player, you're gonna go for the shiny, and if you do, you're gonna get impatient repeating that same simple monkey bar challenge, and having just used your air dash to grab that ring box from a decent distance away, you'll maybe start to feel a little bit more comfortable taking the risk this time around. So instead of climbing the bars, you take that leap of faith, knowing already that the camera didn't jitter or move the first time around, knowing that you can trust the camera and everything else involved in a simple jump here. The only way to make this little warm-up safer would have been to add a safety net platform below, but hey, can't win them all. The second time many players will encounter the monkey bars on Red Mountain, yet again it's a decent distance away, but this time you're given a couple options. The path on your left is a risky one, a stream of fire that will blow on and off right where Sonic would be climbing. Time it wrong, you're gonna get hit and you're gonna lose a life by falling into the bottomless pit below. Actually, now that I'm looking at this footage again, that may just be part of a different path for the level that I skipped over, that you have to do if you didn't take the shortcut I did, but whatever the case, you're being challenged slightly more on the monkey bars if you do go this way. On the right, however, there are a string of enemies floating across a long gap, along with a little hint box suggesting that you try using the homing attack a few times in a row. As far as I recall, this would be the first mandatory time in the series that the game expects you to use the homing attack over a huge bottomless pit. What was before a way to give those that were maybe new to three-dimensional games an easier way to orient around and deal with enemies was now finally a crucial game mechanic that you needed to start working into your base skill set, and quite literally, this stage makes it trial by fire. Not too long after this, you'll find sets of monkey bars suspended above an active volcano, making you jump from handhold to handhold this time. At another point in the level, there's a set of monkey bars with the actual monkey enemy standing on top of it, daring you to try to climb over, warning you that he's gonna throw some bombs at you if you do. Time and again, this stage eases you into the homing attack and the air dash, gradually upping the challenge while showing you that it's still safe to take these risks, and all the while, a nice, upbeat track comforts you rather than something that might pressure you, rather than driving you implicitly forward and accidentally forcing you to make a mistake and making you uncomfortable with these mechanics they're trying to teach you. It's telling you, go at your own pace, just get it done right rather than worrying about fast. I'll say it, this is a masterpiece in Sonic level design, culminating in an incredible second half adventure that has you sprinting along walls, asking you to chain homing attacks across the perilous lava below. After Red Mountain gives you a lesson in level design, a lesson in Sonic gameplay, it rewards you for your efforts with just a straight banger on the back nine where you can prove both what you've learned and that you can do it in a speedy challenge. Now, I could genuinely gush about just about every Sonic level left in this game, because with just a bit of time, a bit of taking my time, and a bit of a fresh perspective, they've all blossomed for me. Levels that I previously just didn't care for, such as the next one, the oft-maligned Sky Deck, I absolutely adore now, because I don't panic at the sign of a bottomless pit. I'm still gonna pucker a bit because that's my basic platforming instinct, but I learned the comfort zone with the controls, with Sonic's sometimes buttery shoes, and in taking my time, I stopped caring nearly as much about getting the perfect run like this is some racing game. Now, I could step back and enjoy finding new ways to traverse the deck of Eggman's ship, to leap across massive pits, dodge giant cannon fire. I could enjoy actively damaging Eggman's ship enough for it to crash into the ocean now that I think about it. Wow, huh. Well, it's a good thing Eggman's army are all robots and not living things. Would have been a lot of casualties. A platforming level full of bottomless pits isn't usually my idea of a fun time, and yet, it all felt like this puzzle that continued to build. I can't put my finger on what clicked in my head this time with Skydeck, but it just works now. In that same vein, I've never been a fan of narrow straightaways in the adventure games because that slippery game feel always came back and led to me feeling like it was inevitable that I would collide with a wall. Even if I just held forward and I didn't do anything else, I would end up overcorrecting somehow, careening into the wall, feeling like it was the game's fault and losing all of that momentum. The ancient pyramid level known as Lost World opens up with a 20-second or so straightaway that does more than just set the aura that you're descending deeper and deeper into a tomb that nobody's seen for millennia. It also, as dumb as it may sound, acts as a comfort check. I'd played this level more times than I had beaten Sonic Adventure. For some reason, it always felt like my buddies defaulted to this level whenever they would play the game, even though, as far as I remember, they hated it. Kids are weird. Whatever the case, this was the level I thought of first whenever I thought of Sonic Adventure, and putting a new player into level 9 naturally didn't turn out great, especially when it really does feel like the game just handled worse on a GameCube controller for me. But this time, I'd put several more hours into Sonic's gameplay. I'd gotten almost every emblem up until this point, including some of the ones sprinkled in the overworld that Sonic's not even supposed to be able to get. Also, I wasn't using a GameCube controller this time. Those things are only good for Smash. Fight me. There was this little moment of revelation during this straightaway that I used to loathe in Lost World when I realized, holy shit, I'm not pathetic at this game anymore. Like, I knew I'd finally felt comfortable with the mechanics, and I know that this is just holding forward, but this was second nature now. Rather than overthinking it and trying to keep the stick as straight as possible only for it to mess up anyway, I could fully appreciate how complicated it must have been to create this sort of hallway with bends and curves and still somehow keep the player centered. This section became the moment where the game kind of got real. Later, when the level lets you peek outside as Sonic runs along an outer walkway overlooking the dense jungle, it's something else entirely. It's magical. Now, despite all this, I think this level is still a bit overcomplicated. Nobody likes having to ride the buggy, janky snake statue over a bottomless pit, all while dealing with slow water physics. I still don't care for the technically impressive sections like the pitch black room, which can only be illuminated by Sonic tilting the mirrors inside, or the weird gravity panels that let you walk on walls near the end. Where Skydeck for some reason felt like a good puzzle level despite not having really that many puzzles at all, this one has too many puzzles that just bog the pace down too much. But that said, this time around I felt comfortable enough to experiment in these 3 rooms, and I learned how to just outright skip all of that heartache with some precise leaps. I don't think it's possible for there to be a perfect Sonic game, especially now that there are so many competing beliefs as to what Sonic should even be. Nobody's gonna argue that the last 2 or 3 levels in Sonic's story and adventure are very imperfect beasts, and I'll always personally draw issue with a section or a stage that shatters the pacing, like Lost World does far too many times. But I do believe that it's these moments, the ability to use momentum in a novel or crafty manner to bypass the slowdowns, those originally forced breathers, or the gimmicky puzzles, that perfectly capture what classic Sonic was often meant to be. A game about flow state, one that challenges the player to get as far as they can in one unbroken breath. That design philosophy rings true even if some of the games struggled to provide that flow state for more than a short burst, or if the developers actively threw in hazards just to meanly try and break your momentum the first few times through. And I'll say, to move past just Sonic here, in 4 or 5 of this game's 6 campaigns, I could hold that flow state, maybe arguably at the cost of those other campaigns being kind of blink and you'll miss 'em. I already talked a bit about Tails and I don't really have much more to say about his gameplay, but after Tails, I actually went in an intentionally weird order to try and break any sort of built-in preconceptions I may not have realized I held by going in a certain order. So after going through Sonic and Tails, I jumped over to E102 Gamma, the weird, arcade, third-person shooter kinda gameplay. Honestly, for as random as it may feel to have a shooter in a Sonic game, in 1998 or 1999, you gotta remember, you might only get 1 game per year, and it was an ambitious decision to almost make Sonic Adventure its own sort of demo disc, as a way to try and convey the Dreamcast's value versus the looming PlayStation 2. Actually, I had no idea until I was doing some research for this retrospective that Sega partnered with Hollywood Video and allowed consumers in the US to rent the Dreamcast and a Sonic Adventure demo build months ahead of its September 1999 launch. Imagine being able to rent a nearly finished Nintendo Switch and a copy of Breath of the Wild back in October 2016. This game really was equal parts experimentation and sly marketing, something that was absolutely necessary if the Dreamcast was going to have a chance to hold strong in the console market, and if Sega was even going to survive. And for what it's worth, Gamma's story provides such a unique perspective that he more than earns his place here. There's a reason why this monotone robot is one of the most memorable characters, period, in Sonic actually, and it's because he gave a rare perspective into the other side of Sonic's travels. When Gamma's campaign begins, the newly made Warbot wakes up in a stasis pod. To Gamma's right is one of Eggman's menacing Mecha Sonic models that players fought a couple times in the earlier games. To his left is the infamous Metal Sonic. Dead ahead of him is Eggman himself, prepping his newest creation for a life of destruction. Through Gamma's point of view, we get a great peek into what Eggman is truly like, or was back when he was more menacing and less bumbling. A maniacal genius who has zero empathy, zero patience, a madman who will happily berate his own creations rather than consider that he's the one at fault for building flawed machines. Hell, Eggman quickly pits Gamma against an earlier E100 model, E101 Beta, and shortly after Gamma wins, the robot discovers that his creator has Beta dismantled with zero remorse. The Doctor is just brutal in his portrayal here, and immediately you're left feeling uneasy, feeling kind of bad for the poor robots. But then they're just robots, right? Well, no. As astute manual readers and fans alike will recall, Eggman tends to use animals as the power source for his machines, and the E100 series of robots are no different. This is sort of what kicks Gamma's short but crucial story into full gear. Eggman tasks his robot militia with capturing a specific tailed frog that swallowed one of the Chaos Emeralds, and at some point while doing this, another one of the robots captures Amy, who's protecting a little blue bird. This bird also happens to have a Chaos Emerald, and when Gamma's instructed by Eggman to take the bird from Amy's possession, well, two different stories happen depending on which story you're playing through here. This is where that alternate storytelling is really at its messiest, because for some reason, Gamma is kind of a chatterbox in every other story behind his own, where he's stoic and mostly silent. In one version of this story, Gamma's logic chip breaks or something when Amy explains the concept of friends. It's not really fully clear. But on the other side, Gamma looks into the little birdie's eyes, and that bird happened to be friends or family with the bird that's powering Gamma himself. Now, it's not exactly well explained whether the robots themselves can gain sentience, or if in this case, Gamma's bird broke through the consciousness. I'm frankly not sure how a bird even took a photograph, but I'm really not going to think too much about it. Even if the game stumbles here, it starts Gamma down a very melancholy path. After this moment, Gamma overrides his programming and decides to free the other E100 units the only way that he knows how, by destroying them. In Gamma's mind, is he freeing the other robots by making sure they don't have to suffer anymore, or is he freeing the birds within, knowing that they're the ones that are his actual friends? It's never directly explained, and that level of interpretation is why Gamma is still so remembered today by Sonic fans. In practice, Gamma's 5 stages will take only a fraction of the time that just about any other character's stages will, and they bring along a fun little arcade gimmick to them. Instead of the timer counting up, for his level specifically, your clock ticks down, with Gamma, I don't know, exploding or something if he's not fast enough. The levels are really easy, so I never saw what happens when you fail. You can extend that timer by shooting enemies with Gamma's gun, and if you lock onto multiple targets at once, you'll gain an even bigger time bonus. There's really very little to write home about with Gamma's gameplay, since some of his stages are barely a minute long even if you're trying to take your time. That said, I really do like the idea of his A-rank challenges, as most of them require you to end the stage with more time than you started with, which is still super easy admittedly, but it feels good, so I'm not going to complain. Really, what hits home most with Gamma is that he's sort of cursed to live this short, sad life even when he takes it into his own hands. Everybody else in Sonic Adventure is back in the next game in the same serialized way that Sonic has been and always will be. Gamma dies. Eggman moves on. Nothing changes. At the end of the day, even though he saves Amy from maybe being killed, Gamma's just another one of Eggman's Badnik robots, and the bird that's released from inside him when he dies is just one of hundreds, maybe thousands, that Sonic and his crew have saved in the past. It sort of makes you reflect a little bit back on those earlier games, even though it's just a small story beat from a character condemned to die. Did Sonic need to go in this direction with its storytelling? Sure. No, but this isn't exactly overboard. It's all interesting optional context provided retroactively to games that had reached millions of players before. It serves a purpose here in Adventure, and to me at least, it truly does improve the Genesis games, even if just a smidge. In the future, it will definitely very much so go overboard, but that's probably for another day. Amy's story was where I went next, just given how intertwined I remembered it was with Gamma's, and her campaign is one that I know also gets a decent amount of flack depending on who you ask. I remember scratching my head a little bit when I first played it, but overall I considered it more or less harmless, maybe a little bit of padding at the worst. I won't say that going in fresh for this retrospective made me particularly love it, but I was surprised at how much I appreciated what the developers seem to have been going for, even if it didn't exactly work. For one, Amy only has 3 stages, although they're probably the longest on average for any character in the game. Yeah, it turns out being a hedgehog doesn't make you fast in this universe, and she's pretty slow. Something I hadn't fully appreciated before though is how Amy's slower gameplay is set up to deliver a totally different energy from anything else that most Sonic games have ever attempted to do. In fact, the closest comparison for Amy's gameplay as far as Sonic goes is something like Sonic 1 when you have to escape from the flowing lava, because Amy's gameplay is a constant chase meant to stress you out. In all 3 of Amy's levels, she's hunted down by one of Eggman's robots named Zero, because Zero really wants that damn bird's Chaos Emerald. But rather than let this turn into a race, since that was already covered by Tails' gameplay, Amy is forced to go slow, running away from a nemesis that's just about as fast as she is. And as a relatively normal, everyday sort of character compared to Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles, she has to perform mundane tasks that you would otherwise never think about in a Sonic game. Opening a door slowly with a crank, hitting a switch, doing simple block matching puzzles. But since you're constantly being chased, these simple tasks start to add up. Every little mistake means that you might take a hit or lose a life. Sometimes Zero will just bust through walls suddenly to get the jump on you. Other times, the game will suggest you hide behind some cover so Zero doesn't find you. In other words, Amy's adventure is sort of a children's horror game. As early as her first level, Twinkle Park, you run through a series of funhouse mirror rooms where the camera shifts perspectives to throw you off as you're being chased by Zero. Really, the camera shifts into weird angles a bunch of times when you enter new rooms throughout all of her levels, arguably taking the lightest of cues from something like Resident Evil and intentionally messing with your internal balance. It never hit me until this playthrough that Zero was trying to be Baby's first Resident Evil, Baby's first Nemesis system. Did anybody ask for this? No, I mean, I'd be surprised at least, but like Gamma, it ends up being a fascinating, if quick, distraction from the stuff Sonic fans would have come here for. In some ways, it almost plays like a parody of Sonic within Sonic, a way of letting you step back and see what the Hedgehog's world would be like in a boring, normal person's shoes. And this brings me to the elephant in the room, Big the Cat. A character that absolutely nobody asked for, an oaf of a character with a questionable fishing gimmick as his gameplay style. A character who was so hated even when this game first released that he's become Sonic's go-to meme character ever since, which is saying a lot considering how much of Sonic has already been a meme by now. Big the Cat is often pointed to as exactly the kind of thing that's wrong with Sonic, an example why Sonic Adventure actually sucked the whole time. Okay, let's get this out of the way. Come a little closer, I gotta tell you something. A little closer. Perfect. I don't hate it. Now, hear me out, I would never go out of my way to ask for Big the Cat's dumb fishing gameplay to ever return, but for the purpose of the core story, I think Big actually serves a unique purpose too. See, Big is the opposite of Gamma in that he's not affiliated whatsoever with the other side. He's not unlike Amy in that he's just a normal character in a hyper-exaggerated melodramatic world where an insane doctor, whose degree we've never seen, I'd like to point out, constantly assaults the planet and tries to summon mythical beasts of destruction just because he really doesn't like a gang of weird mouse dudes. Big is the spectator in Sonic Adventure. In fact, he's the character that can run into our other heroes the most out in the overworld, the one who can walk up to them and chat with them like they're regular NPCs. He doesn't know or care who Sonic is. I'm not even sure he's technically sentient himself. He just wants to mind his own business, hang out with his weird frog buddy, and do some fishing. The last part is not unlike, say, maybe your dad, the kind of person who in 1998 and 1999 maybe had little interest in buying you another brand new console and a new expensive game. He didn't care what a Sonic was, but he supported your dumb hobby, and maybe it just so happened that his dumb hobby was fishing. I'm not saying that Big the Cat was included specifically to appeal to dads. As far as I can tell, we've never actually heard an exact confirmation of what the hell Sonic Team was thinking for including fishing gameplay, even though folks seem to like to assume that it was marketing for other Sega fishing games. Instead, what I'm saying is that if I were a kid playing this game way back when, I would look at Big and maybe associate his hobby with my parents, and maybe I would start considering that my parents have a different perspective than I do, or my sister or brother does, or whoever it might be, which is part of the message that this game tries to convey to kids, that everybody sees the same events differently through their own eyes. It takes a long time for a kid to realize that they're not the center of the universe, but when somebody like Big is just oblivious to Eggman's evil plans and the horrible things going on around him, when he doesn't know or care that a hero like Sonic even exists, maybe that would be some sort of under-the-hood lesson to show kids that they should empathize and consider other points of view. That's basic Saturday morning cartoon stuff right there, and if the game could along the way maybe hook a few dads in and make them want to play other Dreamcast games, that's a win-win. Now, that's probably not what was happening, and also I need to make it very clear, Big's gameplay sucks. Thank God he only has a few stages, and I'm even more grateful that the main objective of Catch Froggy is pathetically easy. So much so, really, that like Gamma and Amy, while they serve as relatively valuable alternate perspectives for the main story, they don't nearly accomplish their other goal of giving you a true variety of gameplay. It's here, but they're all so short-lived that I doubt many players even tried alternating to break up the journey when you can just swallow the pill whole and move on. I also need to make it clear that despite the C-rank main story stuff being very easy for Big, his B and A rank challenges are the actual worst, requiring you to catch a 1 kilogram and a 2 kilogram fish respectively prior to catching Froggy. Not only do you need specific upgrades for fish this large to even spawn, by the way, Big has the most upgrades in the entire game, I don't know why, the fishing mechanics here were only passable when it came to Froggy himself. When dealing with fish that immediately swim 20 plus meters away and keep your fishing line at the cusp of breaking at all goddamn times, fish whose weights you can't actually check until after you've caught them, fish who, I'll say it, just kind of outright cheat at times, no thank you, I will cheat right back. The B ranks weren't absolutely horrendous. I didn't enjoy them whatsoever, but if I had to choose between catching a 1 kilogram fish as big and getting punched in the mouth, I would ask who's doing the punching and consider it because at least the punch would be quick. The A ranks, though, are legitimately up there with the worst things I have ever seen and witnessed in Sonic, and I'm including fanfiction in that. I cannot believe this is a sentence I've written into a video script now, but while we're talking about fanfiction, let's wrap up Sonic Adventure and talk about why Big is roped into this game's plot, and that brings us, weirdly enough, to Knuckles. Why did I save Knuckles for last during this playthrough? You know what? You don't get to ask questions, okay? So the reason that Big runs into the rest of the Sonic Adventure cast is that his pal Froggy somehow swallowed a Chaos Emerald. I would have expected Big to be the one to do that, and that's not a fat joke, it's more that he's an absolute moron. I will say there's very little in Sonic Adventure that's funnier than Big stumbling into a deep lore flashback and 100% not understanding any of it. By the way, this is the exact same dead-eyed look that your parents gave you when you tried to explain Sonic lore to them as a kid, I promise. So throughout each character's campaign, at least one point they're flashed into either the Mystic Ruins or the returning Angel Island from Sonic 3, which houses the Master Emerald that we saw in that game. Look, I just spent a few minutes giving a critical breakdown of Big's contributions to Sonic Adventure's messaging, so forgive me that I don't care about this. Yeah, no, I just don't really care about the overall backstory that this game tries to give. Like, the game vaguely explains a bunch of time that the Master Emerald, shocker, is the Master Emerald that controls the 7 smaller Chaos Emeralds. But this doesn't really mean all that much. The flashbacks serve to try and intrigue you, to have you wondering what's bubbling under the surface in the game where the villain has the same name as the Emerald. That's not some big plot twist reveal, and the answers that are withheld from us over the course of the 6 campaigns simply aren't interesting enough for the questions it tries to make us ask. Which is fine, that's all cool, but it starts to teeter into taking itself a little bit too seriously. And hey, Knuckles. When you start up his story, the Echidna wakes up to discover that the Master Emerald he's been guarding his entire life has been broken, and that Chaos has escaped from it. Man, first the Master Emerald's just stolen in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and now it's shattered. Poor dude's having a rough time. Also, without the Emerald's power, the floating Angel Island crashes into the ocean, again for the second time since Sonic 3, again probably causing a tsunami that I can only assume killed thousands. The one and only goal for Knuckles in his story is to find all of the Master Emerald's broken pieces so that he can, I don't know, tape it back together or something? Knuckles' gameplay style is one that I definitely didn't appreciate as much the first time around, a treasure hunt through a handful of levels where you're asked to find 3 shards hidden in each of the sprawling stages. But it was again thanks to those B and A rank challenges, and really just going in with a more open mind, that I really did grow to enjoy this more open exploration focus. It had always felt odd my first time playing that there were a bunch of hint orbs that essentially pointed you in the exact right direction of one of the 3 emerald pieces, at least until I played the incredibly fun B rank stages, which challenge you to not use a single one of these hints while completing the levels. And given that's still not very hard, I'm assuming the hints were because kids during focus tests just couldn't figure it out, and that's fine, whatever. In order to find all of the shards, you'll need to use Knuckles' trademark gliding and wall climbing abilities, and you'll often have to destroy enemies or pieces of the terrain to find the gems hidden in each. Although at their longest, these stages are still only a couple minutes long, they scratch that same sort of itch as speeding through stages as Sonic, racing as Tails, or as discovering new pathways and secrets in the Genesis originals. These stages often reuse the lesser explored areas from other characters' levels, such as turning Casinopolis' massive lobby into a sprawling vertical, almost theme park, with animatronic displays and moving parts. It's these sorts of new perspectives on old levels, along with Knuckles' focus on scouring the terrain, that gives you a new appreciation for the level of detail that Sonic often just blazes past. Yet again, the power of perspective makes itself known in Sonic Adventure. And of course, since the gem locations are randomized across a handful of possible hiding spots, there's a ton of room for Knuckles to have a lot of replayability. That said, you'd think with how good Knuckles is at seeing through the cracks, he'd realize that he should never listen to Eggman when the latter tells him that Sonic is trying to break or steal his big precious emerald. It's kind of a shame that the dude falls for the same story twice in a row between Sonic 3 and now, because it makes Knuckles look like a total idiot, and in turn, it makes Eggman look kind of like an idiot too when his main successes only occur when one or more of his foes do some dumb shit. Like, of the 7 Chaos Emeralds, Eggman just swoops in to grab 3 of them when Sonic, Tails, and/or Knuckles either drop them or are just walking. Most of this game makes Sonic look really pathetic too, now that I'm thinking about it. But that's okay, because once you complete all 6 stories, a final chapter unlocks to throw it all together into a nice 7-layered cake. And as dumb as Sonic looks when he's tripping or whatever, we all know we need a badass Supersonic segment to wash away the pain. I mean, even still, this part kind of takes itself a little bit too seriously as well, as we get a series of cutscenes wrapping together all of the flashbacks and explaining how Knuckles' ancestors essentially went extinct because they tried to use the Chaos Emeralds as a weapon of war, and Chaos himself was the peaceful guardian of the Emeralds until Knuckles' ancestors went and pissed him off, and then this little girl used magic to seal herself and Chaos inside the Master Emerald? I'm sure that a much younger me would have enjoyed this sort of stuff, but looking at it now, I kind of shrug and move on. It's pretty messily thrown together throughout each of the 6 stories for what's an incredibly basic backstory, and where the game tends to do really well portraying each character's unique perspective on the events and the timeline of their own stories, when it comes to these flashbacks, they were simultaneously vague and repetitive. The presentation of these flashbacks, voice acting aside as always, is incredibly strong, but it just doesn't end up feeling earned overall to me. And the same sadly ends up being true for this final chapter for me, as after all of the exposition dumps, Chaos steals the 7 emeralds for himself, flipping Eggman the bird and turning into a giant liquid tentacle monster that absolutely ravages Station Square in a massive flood. Having used all of the energy built up in the emeralds, Chaos then discards them, only for all of Sonic's friends to instantly grab all 7 emeralds again and give them to Sonic, who, by the power of friendship, uses the positive friendship energy that's still inside the emeralds to become supersonic, because Chaos only used the negative energy. If I wasn't thinking much about it, again, awesome at a kid brain level, and the final section of speeding down the streets of Station Square as Supersonic and attacking Chaos from the inside out, still an incredible segment even today. But it feels like a massive missed opportunity, since Sonic only gets the emeralds by exposition after you've spent the entire game playing as 6 characters and getting all of them one by one. What could have been a powerful final level where Sonic traverses the destroyed hub world of Station Square that we've spent hours exploring in order to grab those Chaos Emeralds once again, ends up being a cutscene. Hell, more importantly, this could and should have been a team effort in itself, rather than Knuckles just grabbing 4 of the emeralds off screen here. Why not let us play as Knuckles so he can hunt for 3 of the emeralds in the wreckage? Have Tails fly across the tilted rooftops to grab 1 emerald himself, while Sonic runs across some warped roadways. Amy can open a door or whatever she does, I don't know, and you could even have Big use his weird floaties that actually let him sink underwater so he could go under the surface and grab the last emerald. It could have been an amazing moment of show rather than the game's reward for hours of dedicated playtime being a final chapter that mostly tells. At the end of the day, it's not a huge deal, but it does feel to me like they stumbled while trying to stick the landing. I feel that this could have been a stronger final chapter than 25 minutes of story and 5 minutes of solid gameplay that's only really remembered because of the awesome music that blasts in the background. And for what it's worth, by the way, even though I haven't gone out of my way to praise the soundtrack much, it's usually banger after banger. And remember that it was feeling that positive energy of the fucking Chaos Emeralds. No, it was feeling that positive energy spread across the fan base and the internet while listening to the 30th Anniversary Symphony's renditions of songs like this one, like Open Your Heart, that even got me to consider spending dozens of hours playing, growing on, and eventually 100% completing this game, let alone spending dozens more putting together this video. The fact that stupid butt rock music can leave me feeling connected to a fan base of a series I've never been super into, and that it can motivate me to go this far, that's the highest praise that I can give to a soundtrack like this, and it's high praise that the score carries this game across the finish line better than the gameplay itself really does. Don't get me wrong, it's a cool Sonic ending and everything, but I would have liked to see more from a Sonic Adventure ending. I'll admit it might be a bit of a nitpick, but I wouldn't be making it if not for how much I've grown to love this game through this playthrough and through this retrospective. I see now why Sonic Adventure was held in such high regard for a time. I've learned how incredibly well it goads you into replaying the stages and learning to work around the developer's own self-admitted shortcomings. How they turned a weak, finicky camera into a strength more often than not through cinematic angles and memorable set-piece moments. For most of the online, why would they do this takes that I've seen over the years, I've discovered the whys for myself, and generally they make so much more sense than Sega is ever really given credit for. The tough decisions of a company that was trying to regain good faith from consumers by providing a landmark game that could kind of cover multiple genres, the sly angling at maybe turning other folks in the household into players and fans. It may not have ended up working out sales-wise, and it certainly led to a lot of heartache and negativity in retrospect, but a game like Sonic Adventure just hadn't been attempted before. Putting aside all of Sega's countless internal issues during this era, if the Dreamcast wasn't doomed off the bat by the PlayStation 2, I think Sonic Adventure has a better chance of making its case, rather than being almost a weird hipster pick. If the Dreamcast is able to succeed even a little bit more, Sega likely doesn't end up with the reputation of being a losing studio among players looking back years later, and without that label attached to it, I think there's a world where Sonic Adventure gets more of the credit that it certainly deserves alongside so much of the flack it undeservedly gets. I say this as somebody who specifically grew up playing and revering these two games. If the Dreamcast holds on another year or two, Sonic Adventure may today be held up not necessarily to the same mythical heights as Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, but maybe not that far outside that conversation. It certainly wouldn't be trashed nearly as much. But then, Sega going third party when it did genuinely was for the best when we look back with the hindsight we have now. So really, Sega just needed to do better when they ported this game. If the DX release wasn't the only accessible version of Sonic Adventure, if it wasn't the version people go to when they hear that this game is so cool, if it wasn't the version that they played and went, to the Sonic Adventure was never good takes that we've all seen 1,000 times by now, wouldn't be nearly as common. I've been guilty of looking at this game in a light that I now feel was unfair, and that is Sega's fault, but that doesn't make me feel any better about it. I can only imagine how fans have felt this whole time. If you've ever given this game a shot and maybe only have gone through the critical paths before writing the game off, or hell, if you've only played the shiny and glitchy DX version, if you have the means to give the original Sonic Adventure a chance, and if you take a bit of time with it, I think it'll surprise you. It sure as hell surprised me. By no means is it the masterpiece that nostalgics sometimes make it out to be, but I can tell you as one often nostalgic dude that Mario 64 kinda sucks sometimes too. I can tell you that age wore hard on Ocarina of Time for me at one point, to the point that I couldn't really play it much anymore, despite that being my favorite game of all time at one point. And I can tell you that I've gone through both of those games and other favorites of mine in the same way that I have here for Sonic Adventure, where I step out of my current tainted nostalgic lens and I try to play them for the first time all over again. And just as I rediscovered the magic in some of my favorites, I found exactly why Sonic Adventure is a favorite for so many of you. I suppose I'll end on a bit of a soapbox here if you'll let me. Enough Sonic Adventure videos exist out there from longtime fans defending this game, or from lapsed fans or non-fans digging their heels in and analyzing it in the modern light, under the pretense of speed, cracking jokes, and ignoring the adventure in Sonic Adventure, ignoring much of the logic behind even the game's sometimes questionable decisions. I went into this project knowing that there was a strong chance that I still wouldn't see what fans do in Sonic Adventure, but as somebody who's watched many of those other, often polarized retrospectives, I still hoped that mine would be a valuable, unique perspective to share, that of a relative outsider who did come to these games well after their era, who didn't get them like the fans did, much like you watching this today may have done yourself with this game. But also the perspective of somebody who took the time to have a bit of historical empathy, to see what those day one fans fell in love with on day one, to see why this game is still so beloved today, even despite Sonic's more mixed online reputation. Even if I hadn't come out on this end of the retrospective actually liking the game quite a bit now, and that would have been okay, I knew from experience that not much like this video existed yet. Hopefully you found it all as fun and interesting to watch as I did experiencing it, and I look forward to continuing this conversation in the comments. Now, none of this is to say that if you don't like the game, you're wrong. There's a lot not to like with Sonic Adventure, and sometimes it's hard to accept bugs and oversights, even when we know how to avoid those same sorts of things in our favorite childhood games. No, what I'm saying is that it's easy to throw a rock without considering those sorts of contexts, and then turn a blind eye when our favorites commit those same sins. I'll step up first and say that I've been guilty of that many times myself, but at a certain point I realized that some of the more negative takes, retrospectives, the critiques, the more cynical online takes in general, often end up sort of punching down and don't accomplish much else, and there's more than enough real negativity in the fake world that is the internet that I don't think we need to continue propagating that. I've seen exactly this happen with my favorite series, and now there's always gonna be that one guy that won't shut up when expressing opinions that someone else made for him. To me, it doesn't accomplish anything to tear down something that others genuinely enjoy if instead I can try to see what those folks appreciate, even if it doesn't end up being for me in the end. I guess what I'm saying is it's a lot more fun to critique a game or a show or a movie or a song or whatever constructively, to try and raise it up and provide a framework for improvement, even if these sorts of takes may get fewer responses, fewer clicks than just swinging an axe and calling it big poopy diarrhea garbage. I don't think Sonic Adventure deserved that, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I can see why a lot of Sonic fans are bitter and jaded now. Especially as we enter an era where game developers are watching these sorts of videos, dumb "what were they thinking" takes are weak, when as long as there's not a language barrier, you can just email a person and ask them what their thought process was when working on a game or whatever it is, nicely. It's not hard. I've done it myself with small and large studios and projects alike for a half-decade now. I've gotten responses from developers eager to share and talk shop about their craft because somehow nobody ever asks them what the job was like, and I'm a nobody. You can do the same thing too. Putting yourself in a developer's shoes for even a bit will probably change how you think about the games that you love, hate, or the ones that you just don't even think about. Hell, even just taking yourself back to the era of a game's release, going back in time a bit, can completely change how you see it. It did for me. Now, it may not make those decisions good in hindsight. It may not make the game any less aged or any better when you consider how it plays years after the fact. I mean, look at GoldenEye, for example. But it also might make all the difference in the world. After all, as Sonic Adventure loves to show us, a little perspective goes a long way. Also, I just realized Gamma wears Heelys, so I think he deserved to die. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. But not as much as I love my patrons, such as Goldstorm07, Anon42, the FOE3, Gianni, Philly D360, Vincent, Adonis Alexander, Bahari, Cooking Mama, Eclipse 2025, Even Luck, Harry, Hotzi, Ibathon, Jay's Reviews, James Boss, Justin Gregoire, Rodney220, Soggy Waffles, The Milkman, Tabriz Sadiq, Terminally Nerdy, Wolf Chaosan, and Buckles Chucklow. If you want to be on this list of eternal love, that sounds a little weird, early access to videos, and other awesome perks, visit patreon.com/thegoldenbolt. Do it, or else the Chao gets it.